My name is Medhat Galal. I'm the VP of Enablement. I'm responsible for training in COE. I guess my job is complex enough that I had to have a diagram right on my title. So enjoy that for a second. I'm here today to talk to you about enablement all the way to success. How many of you are actually new to Appian in general, whether you're considering Appian or you're just starting with the new project, okay? You're the right audience for this. How many of you are struggling with maybe people that have learned some of the basics of Appian, but the higher level of maturity or understanding of how to apply the training very well? Okay, also the right audience. So hopefully I'll be addressing both questions very quickly here. Okay, so I'm going to get right to it. Enablement is a specific equation for us. We apply the very same equation for our own people. I'm also responsible for the Appian Academies, how we train our own employees, the partner training as well as our customer training. So all things that are inbound and outbound as far as Appian is concerned in terms of how you do the best possible job on our product is actually my responsibility between the Appian COE as well as the training group as well. So from an enablement standpoint, I think about enablement as a specific role training, and a lot of you may have taken one or two classes with us. But really, the things I wanted to highlight today is the differences between what people usually do and the patterns that we've seen in the past couple of years and continuous learning. The one thing that is fairly different with Appian when it comes to this particular first point is that we have our own continuing education cycle. And I'll talk about what we're going to do differently going forward. Of course, enablement means doing a lot of the work with tremendous amount of quality. And quality usually comes with both the right level of training, the right level of background, as well as experience. There is so much you can teach in theory, but practice beats theory 10 times out of 10 times. High quality is great if you're going to spend months and years building the greatest software ever, and you don't have that kind of time when you're trying to use an application platform to build rapid applications. So that means speed. Now with speed, I wouldn't say comes the great responsibility, comes a great risk. If you go too fast, you risk making a lot of errors. Some of these are extremely costly. You probably experienced some of these yourself and maybe other technologies or people that are kind of brand new to the technology. So to me, enablement is really role training, including continuous training, high quality, and then tremendous amount of speed and efficiency. Now, the product does part of that speed that's given, but people also need to be very efficient in the way that they approach understanding requirements all the way to building the application. Now, to blow your mind a little bit with enablement model, we call this the maturity model. It looks very scary, but it is not. And this is typically the journey that people will go through over time to learn Appian and be as effective as some of the most and highest experts in our industry. So it really starts with some basic skills. Some of these apply to the technologists, those who will use Appian to integrate with other technologies, third-party or exposed Appian, or even use some authentication systems. If these terms don't make sense to you, then I'm going to talk about the business people then. And then also the other part of this, you've got project management skills, you've got people that need to understand the feature function of the product, albeit not technical, but able to map those features to the very product they're trying to implement those features on. I meant requirements. That's typically the analyst role. There are some basic skills they need to learn to understand the terminology, the language, and we teach those in some of the classes that we have. Next comes in, it's great that you can take a bunch of requirements, sit in front of a local install, and build an application for yourself. But really it comes down to how do you apply that when you're working with 2-3 different people, working on a number of objects and a number of other techniques inside the product and making sure that you don't have collision. Now you're working inside of a team that have divvied up responsibilities. Some people are doing front end, some people are doing the workflow, some people are doing the data modeling. And you want to make sure that they're doing that as effectively as possible. So we subscribe to, and in fact I have a session in the afternoon about agile delivery and what it means and how to apply it well. Things that we are planning on teaching this year that we teach our own people, but we haven't really felt it was our responsibility or obligation to teach on a knowledge area that is very well covered in the market, but we now feel obligated that how you apply these terminologies is our responsibility. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But how you run a project is extremely just as important as having basic skills of how to apply it. Most people come to our training to address the first point. Now assume that you really love Appian, you think it's a tremendously productive tool, and you've got a number of large teams. Some of you have a number of teams that are running in different tracks, building several applications, each of which are doing parallel development. You'll hear some customers asking us about concurrent development. What do you do in this case? At what point do you ship the product? At what point do you enhance the product that you built on top of Appian? That requires some additional activities beyond just running daily stand-ups and grooming the backlog and figuring out what the story mapping is. It really comes down to release planning. How do you plan those releases? How effective is your release management cycle? How do you make sure that there is no collision? One, project A depends on certain common objects. Project B depends on it as well. One project needs to go live before one project. How do you manage that interrelationship between these different projects? That's extremely important as well. And then last but not least, when these apps go live, they need their respective operation and maintenance on top of these. In most cases, a lot of the customers that kind of walk that maturity model journey, whether it's individual or the entire group, as a matter of fact, they're comfortable staying around here in many cases when they have 1 to 3 or 4 apps. Now, when you really want to unlock the entire enterprise, and I know this grows, you're talking about maybe dozens of apps. We have a couple of customers that have over 260 different applications. Now, it's more like shared services. Now, you have to have a common architecture. What is the roadmap? What is the enterprise roadmap for building effectiveness and agility into the whole business process? It isn't about solving one automation issue. It's more about what are the opportunities from a business standpoint? How do we break that down into something that maybe Appian can do or another technology can do and manage that across the board between the different departments, finance, HR, retail, marketing, et cetera, as well as manage that with IT. So now you're talking about an involvement from multiple groups, all our key stakeholders in the success of that application. You want to make sure that it's well planned, well executed, well released, and you all meets the skill sets of the people that need to execute. So that's extremely important. Now, another scale diagram, really when you're fully enabled, this is what it would look like. You'll see some elements here that I'm not going to cover in depth, but when you talk about COE level 4 maturity, you're talking about how to do program management, project services, backlog, roadmap, talking about shipping incrementally and frequently. At the project level, you've got people that have high level of skills that can go and get going very quickly, do development and testing right away. And then another team that is also getting spun up. If you start adding teams, they start doing some shadowing, et cetera. Now that looks really scary. So it really is not that scary. And we're actually better than most other products out there. It's basic skill sets and a number of other things to do. So this over-the-top diagram that you've seen is the placemat that you'll see with scaled, agile, number of agile technologies. But really what it boils down to is this. How do you plan your maturity over time on a time scale? How many months would it take on average? And I'll cover those momentarily. Most of you would have taken basic training, of course, to understand the product, the terminology, depending on what role you'll play in a project, whether you are the stakeholder, the PO, the project manager, the analyst, or even more so the designer, the people that are actually going to build the applications. Usually Appian would like to be involved in the first project. There's a lot of setup costs. I want to make sure it gets done right, and that's where the shadowing starts, right? The people that have been trained don't necessarily have all the know-how to do all the different and difficult jobs, especially when you're just starting up. It's the first install. You want to make sure you get it really right. You understand the sizing of the application, the scaling of the application, common object structures, artifacts, user experience, overall architecture, et cetera. And Appian has a common best practice that we'd like to kind of pass that wisdom on to everyone and want to do it one project at a time. So usually we deploy the acceleration team, highly effective experts. Obviously, we train them ourselves as well, and we're trying to train everybody the same way. And we do some client, maybe partner shadowing as well. Then comes in enablement. You start doing some planning. Now, who are the next batch of people? Have they finished the basic skills on that maturity model, and should they know how to learn to run inside of a project? Part of that is shadowing with the acceleration team that runs exactly using that agile approach. Part of it is skills and coaching on using the very product now in real example and real practice of what they have today. And then kind of goes on and on. At some point, acceleration teams taper off and they disappear in the background. Enablement, perhaps team, maybe your own central center of excellence running that is doing enablement on an ongoing basis. And they also start tapering off because the idea behind the agility of this tool is to be fairly self-sufficient as a team. Now, whether you have team A, B, and C, every team needs to be able to run fairly self-sufficient, not just at the organizational level, but at the team level as well. And last but not least, you need to have ongoing continuous learning. This is the role training that I mentioned. If you've seen all the presentations so far, the theme was Appian releases the product fairly fast. Now, you got to stay current. Now, there are some things that are very interesting about that. It's a product release itself, but there are some additional things that are kind of tips and tricks. We try to do those through our marketing, but we're going to formalize some of those. Now, one thing we've done differently this year, if you're familiar with Appian so far, you probably come to one of our design courses, one of our bootcamp courses if you have technology background. The bootcamp is kind of the right course to go. We've added, a few weeks ago, the analyst role, And it's so important because it's the role that maps those business requirements to the teams that are going to execute and build those artifacts. How many of you have seen, kind of here's the requirements document, we all read it, and by the time it goes from design to mock-up to a development team, it looks different? Raise your hands. Okay, I'm hoping to see most of the room. How different is that by the time it goes to testing? Very? Say something. Tell me you're awake. Very. Okay, great. So we think all of that starts a little earlier than we thought. We thought, well, maybe we teach the designers to be better at this, to kind of read the mind of the requirements document and the people they're working with. It's not true. We figured out that the translation layer happens between the product management, the PO operation, and usually that's confined to the business analyst, the person that is really working with the business users. That does not necessarily withdraw the product owner, the ultimate stakeholder of that application, from their role of responsibility, but it makes sure that the analysts themselves, the business analysts, are well-versed in the tool and understand the different feature functionality, at least what Appian vision is on how to use our application, and map that well enough so that when they work within the team, in this case, the business analysts, our typical approach is that they are embedded within the team. They're explaining to them, here's what we think the user experience needs to be, here's what the flow needs to be, and that's kind of been a role that we kind of missed in the past. So we introduced courses that cover those areas of skills at the very beginner level, because you kind of need that even for the first project. We introduced that a few weeks back, and we're going to continue to enhance that as well. And the rest of the roles, of course, are extremely important. Those are the people kind of like, they do the heavy lifting. About 80% of all the work are done by those people. Appian has a tremendous amount of integration facilities. Seen Matt's keynote speech talking about web API, so not just inbound, also outbound integration as well. So we're adding some additional courses here. Our beloved academy, I mentioned that this is how we train our own PS staff. We've exposed our internal training with its rigor, the extended number of hours, homeworks, quizzes, and a final presentation as well. As if it's our customer, we expose that to our partners and customers as well. And many customers and partners actually take us up on that. It's a 2-week, very rigorous boot camp, runs about 8 to 6 every day, homeworks and quizzes every night. It's very rigorous, but at the end of it, you learn everything that you need to be as effective as possible on projects, very quick. And last but not least, we're a software environment. So if you're going to deploy it on-premise, there are some basics that you need to learn. There's some advanced skills that we're also adding later in the year. Now, without talking about training in general, I want to cover these roles because I think a lot of people always ask me, well, what are these people are supposed to do? Now, the naming convention may vary, so I figured if I just provide the description, it'd be better. If you want to call them PO, business analyst, doesn't matter. We're calling analysts to map what they do with what you want to target you people to learn. In general, the most important thing that I think is extremely important is the last one in terms of creating the user stories and the maps to the product feature. The 5 dimensions of the product: news, tasks, records, reports, and actions. Who's making sure that requirement 2.5, 13, 11 says if you go from one form to the next means this? Well, which form? Is it in a task or is it an action? Do you start the process first, or do you make sure that people have inbound tasks that they need to respond to? That mapping, if left to the desires of the designer, they can't necessarily understand what it means. So the analyst role is extremely critical to this. Now, these are the courses that we started offering a few weeks ago. In fact, we opened it up for free for everyone to give us feedback. We know that this is a new area for us. We want to make sure that people provide us feedback. That's available on the website. Definitely read more of the embellished description on that. But that's an area that we're expanding and adding it to our maturity model. Just time check. Everybody have any questions so far? Or we're good so far? Keep going with the roles. Okay, great. Sure. Good question. Probably until the end of Q2. Yeah. The designer, obviously, this is the kind of the 80% work. Almost all the work is, and even our product is targeted for this role. That person that builds the application, they typically implement the application. Now, the way we see them in an org chart inside of a team is that they are working with the different various stakeholders, but they are following the lead of someone who understands the application, the complexity, the deployment structure very well, which is why I always hear the word architects get thrown around, except that we found out that is not exactly the answer to turning every possible application designer into an architect, but rather actually introduce a new role called the lead designer, because architects, the way we've defined it, is someone who is both 1 mile wide and 1 mile deep across all of these different roles that you've seen: the analyst, the designer, the integrator, and the administrator. Now, that's not everybody needs, because everybody has confined set of roles that people perform on projects. So we introduced the lead designer. I actually have a certification for it that was renamed from ACAD Level 2. It's a confusing name as that may be. And we recommend that these people take some of the advanced courses, and we're adding a lot more courses to the lead designer. But typically on a project, that would be your technical lead. That would be the one person that is working with the analyst, working with a product owner, synthesizing that information, figuring out what is the best possible design to meet the user experience, the business requirements for the end user. That is the lead designer. To us, that's usually, for Appian, that's usually the project lead. Typically will be a senior consultant or principal consultant in our world. That's very important. It's also responsible for peer reviews, lead design best practice, basically a mini COE of his own inside that team. And hopefully for every team, you'll have at least one lead designer in place. If you don't have that role and you want to really work effectively at that highest level of maturity, you need to either have that person developed internally, hopefully over time. You need to grab that experience from a partner of ours or from Appian. That's why we also talk about the first project being a very key project to do first. Administration, as I said, is a software, adding some additional courses in terms of high availability, failover configurations tend to be a bit more complex in most installations. Hopefully, if you're going to the cloud, you don't have to worry about it at all. But the administrator is someone who installs, configures, operates, and maintains. But last but not least, they need to know how to scale and troubleshoot Appian when things go bad. If everything is set up right, you've got the operations and maintenance set up in place, Appian is very easy to manage, but you got to keep an eye on it. How is your memory and CPU doing? How is the volume doing? What is the response time? It really comes down to collaboration between a lead designer and typically an administrator if things have to be triaged to make sure that your users have the best experience possible. That's the role. Now, in terms of training, we supply all of our training through multiple channels. Last year, I introduced Coached Academy as a thing that we wanted to launch. We did launch it back in September. It's another layered offering on top of our classroom. I think our instructors are phenomenal. They're fantastic. They work with every single person in a classroom. If you've been in a classroom, met Terry or Jenny, or maybe raise your hand if you know any of these trainers. Okay. Are they awesome? You don't lie to me. I mean, tell me now. But they're great. So what we wanted to do is not provide kind of over-the-top YouTube training level stuff with Coached Academy, which is why it is Coached Academy. You actually get the very same awesome trainers with the Coached Academy. They have live sessions. They do Q&A for you, but the body of the content of the course is basically self-paced, time-boxed. There was an interesting experiment when we launched in September. A lot of people enrolled but never started, or they start but never really finish. So we figured time boxing always works, kind of like why schools have semesters. So we did that too. And then last but not least, we'll come out to you if you wanted to do something very specific. And we're hoping that every particular offering we have in our courses, if that's what you want to do, we'll tailor it to what exactly you need. If you need to train lead designers, but you want them to also start dabbling with some integration, we'll do that for you. That's the intention here, is to figure out where you are in that maturity model scale and go do that for you. This is what we're changing in 2015. So if you're falling asleep, wake up now. All the prior stuff is all the fall asleep stuff. This is the good stuff. So I mentioned early in my presentation that we do provide continuing education to our own staff. And what we've noticed over the past few years that most people come, customers, partners alike in this case, they come to the first 5-day condensed course and gives you a sense that you know a lot about the product. There are always the little nuggets, right? I mean, it's, a box is a container, and maybe we pick the things that are extremely important the first 5 days, but experience, if not honed in and complemented with some continuous learning, it does not necessarily scale well, especially if the product is also changing. We're not releasing a product every 2 years, it's every quarter. So we've noticed that most of our enterprises, whether they're partner or customers, they do undertrain pretty much everybody. And that's when you start running into trouble. Because you end up with people that are staying somewhere on that first scale of basic skills, but never really start evolving over time. So it's important that you continue to improve. If people really want to do this work as a lead designers or as business analysts or as project managers, you really need to figure out how to go from novice to expert. It comes with experience, but definitely comes with continuous up-training. So with that, we figured out, since we have the channel to do that without telling people to travel to Reston or London or Sydney and come attend one of our half-a-day class to learn about tips and tricks and how to do certain things in Appian, we figured we actually push it all the way out there, and we're pushing it out there for free, as a matter of fact. So all of our continuing education that we offer our own people will be available for all our customers and partners as well. So hopefully you'll take us up on that. You got to commit your people to be able to take the training. And then advanced topics as well. These are the specialized topics that don't fit inside of certain classrooms. We figured that there's always room for those. Sometimes we've thrown these as webinars. You've heard from Matt and Malcolm today about that. We want to make sure that some of these targeted content pieces that people want to learn about, we get feedback from the field, from people that are implementing projects, and we'll target these pieces of content. The COE will be responsible for creating the knowledge. Some of these are codified in forum as best practices, but we want to embellish on that and make sure that people understand what it means. So we'll put that for our people and put it out there for everybody. That's what we're really changing. So a quick recap of what we've launched so far in this just Q1. The analyst is a brand new. Designer, lead designer, administrator. We've revamped all of our courses in Q1. As a matter of fact, I understand I'm waiting for an email from my team to say that we've gone live the new courses. So if you've taken a course a couple of weeks ago, let us know. We want you to take the new courses. Tremendous amount of development in terms of content so that it comes close to the classroom as possible. We've also added the things that we learned from Academy, like the quizzes and the exams, right into these courses as well. So there is depth, more depth in the content that is offered online as opposed to what we normally do in our classroom as well. So it comes close. Now, in terms of what's coming, if you looked at the roadmap that I had, in order to arrive at that level 4 maturity, we had to target some of the additional roles, like how to run a program well. So we're adding courses there in terms of agile practices. Integration is becoming an ever bigger deal in Appian. With web APIs, inbound and outbound integration, we released a tremendous amount of facilities to integrate Appian with other technologies. So we're targeting that. We basically scrapped our development courses that said, here's how you write a plugin for Appian to extend it, to now how do you integrate Appian. Plugin is one of the smaller aspects of that, but integrating Appian is really extremely powerful. So we want to target that as well by scrapping our development course and actually creating courses for the integrator role. That's coming soon, hopefully in the next couple of quarters. Now, I sped through that because I'm assuming that you want to ask me any questions about training and or COE. I actually have the Director of Center of Excellence in the back in case we want to answer any questions for you. Sped up through that to give you some time to ask those questions as well. So, and that's the end of my presentation. I went fast through it to get those questions. What can I answer for you today? Yes. On average, we're doing 3x time for the original content. If the content is to be taught in a day or two, then we're kind of 3xing that. I would say on average it's about 2 weeks in total. The question was time boxing for the online courses. Correct? Okay. Other question. People that take the courses online, will that count towards the A score? No, because we know that a lot of our partners do their own internal training. So it wasn't fair to give them additional points if they take training with Appian. It's like saying, pay me so I can give you a couple of points. I actually mentioned that in the partner summit yesterday. So the only thing that counts towards the A score is certification, not the background in training. Good question. Other questions? Yeah. So the question was how to resolve the challenge between two different organizations that kind of mean well, but they're kind of running in their own tracks between business and IT. Is that a good rephrasing of your question? Okay. So it's a hard question. It's a hard question because Appian, when we get involved, you're also squeezed between those two groups. We usually say find the common grounds between both groups. In reality, these groups, you have to kind of coach them into working together because if they ever want to achieve that high level of scale and adaptability, they're going to have to build their own COE. And typically, COE will be comprised of people from IT and an enterprise architect and a stakeholder or business owner, in fact, even a multitude of those business owners as well. So you find the common grounds and common threads and walk them through the walk. It's almost, it's not tell, show, tell. It's more like show, show, show all the time until they kind of work together. Because there are always differences in the politics between investments and what business wants, what IT, how IT can respond. We walk them through that walk. Usually ourselves, and help them kind of form their own governance center, and then off they go. In many cases, we also see a lot of our customers that are very IT-centric, which seems to be working fine. If they already got kind of figured out the operation between how business and IT interact, we're happy to work with IT to make sure that they are as nimble as could be on our technology. It's a great question. Yes? The question was, where does the BPM Center of Excellence sit in an organization, right? It depends. Some organizations are thinking about BPM as its own shared services value stream in and of itself, so it'll actually get a BPM director and get a team underneath. Sometimes they'll actually fork a group of people out of IT, generally out of IT, and make them the steering committee where they have certain links back to IT. But they really need to rely on the business stakeholders to make sure that there is a balances and checks basically in place. We've seen those two models work really well, either a shared service group that is basically working in the middle between both. That would have been what Appian PS, for example, have done if we're there for a couple of projects. Or they actually spin off a group from IT and have them work with business. Usually they pick the people that can work with business really well and have them lead those. And usually we'll start those. They actually end up also being kind of a strong evaluator of software too. We've seen that in the past. Sometimes they'll form that group before they even talk to Appian, as a matter of fact. So you've got great. How is the Center of Excellence formed, and what are the key roles inside of it? Right? Okay. There is always a leader, someone who is fairly neutral, because that's the part that the BPM CU is supposed to really do. You're trying to break the tie and the contention sometimes between IT and business, and that director has to be extremely neutral in this case. He's just looking to advance the business prerogative in general, not kind of be biased towards one group or the other. And then inside of that group, it's really depending on the size and the magnitude of the adoption that you're using a product for, generically, whether you're using Appian or not. So you'll involve some business stakeholders, whether it's HR, finance, marketing, depending on the target group. You'll usually seed it with the first set of stakeholders from the first few applications. And then you'll get IT, depending on the deployment footprint. Are you in the cloud? Are you not in the cloud? You're on-premise, then you may involve a number of people from IT that know how to deploy and manage applications, security, performance, scale, virtualization. They'll be involved. Usually we recommend that there is one or two representatives most from IT. The last thing you want is a COE that has 35 people in the room. No decisions will ever happen this way. But you want representatives from those different areas. If you have security and it's a strong concern, if you're a financial service industry, then maybe security is very important, data security is very important, then you want to make sure that that voice is heard in there. And usually the BPM director is actually the tiebreaker in most cases. IT wants security, but we want agility. What do we do? Here's a good compromise. That's usually the person. The point is to keep moving forward. That's what BPM COE tries to do, remove that interlocking. Great question. Other questions? Yes? Okay, so the question was about fast and agile delivery approach when you're structuring the team, right? There is really no magic because it ties to the people's capability. And I know that sounds like a consulting answer, and it is, unfortunately. Joke is on me. But what we found out, it's not more or less the ratio of the people. You can be as fast as you could be with, a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 designers, so like 1 lead designer and then 1 business analyst. That's, the point is that one team shouldn't really exceed the business management magic number, 7. You've got, maybe a PO and a PM and a process, a lead designer, 3 designers, maybe the admin usually is a shared resource that is running cross application. Maybe you'll have 1 integrator if you're heavy on integration, but not beyond that. And you have the business stakeholder, kind of forms that team at 7, and it kind of stops at that. Now once you have that magic number of teams, shouldn't be larger than that. You can start optimizing for what agile practices tell you to optimize for, right? Your velocity, the team capacity, how do you do prioritization, story maps, spec by example. These are the things you start optimizing for if you have the right size team. We think the right size team is not supposed to be big. Appian certainly doesn't have a big footprint when we deploy our teams to our customers. We keep it small, keep it nimble. It's a magic number. I mean, it's a magic number. You go to any MBA school, they'll tell you, like, people can't manage more than 7 people effectively. And also the number of relationships in terms of communication is exponential. You add one more person, all of a sudden, it's not one more connection. It's actually like, I don't know, 8 more or something. So if these people have to get in sync all the time and you add one more person, it's not just one more person capacity. It ends up being a determinant to the size of the team. Scaled Agile actually does this very well and explain how you run a huge enterprise with software development. The release train is what they call it because it's huge, has so many people on it, it's 150, but they break it down so that the essential unit of teams is 7, even though the entire full team is 150, but the team that is responsible for a certain area of the product or the project is just down to 7. That is a good unit. It can be smaller, but probably not larger. Once you go beyond that, it gets too big and we break it. Appian follows the same principle. Our engineering group is broken exactly the same way. So even inside the application designer, recently we've broken into 2 teams. Those who are worried about what I'm going to ask them in terms of testability and governance going forward, and those who are worried about the designers. How do we build new designers and make it effective? Because the size of the team has gotten bigger, you have to break it up and give them different responsibilities. So that's what I mean by that. I didn't mean that the total team needs to be 7, but the areas of responsibility need to be small. Did that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Yes. So the beginnings of the analyst pass is probably where you want to be. If you're completely unassuming and don't know anything about Appian, that you want to take the platform overview, it's kind of the high-level pitch, what you would normally get from a demo. Beyond that, there are additional basics that walk you through a use case. One of the courses, Platform Overview, covers, here's a business problem, here's what it looks like today, here's how you think about it in terms of the Appian features and the 5 tabs, and if you build it this way, here's what it would look like in Appian. And they kind of map that problem against the features and then show you the end result. I think those are very powerful courses if you're just getting introduced to Appian. If you're going to play the actual analyst role, of course, I recommend the Designer 102 as well as a tech on that, right before the Designer courses. Good question. Other questions? Yes. Great question. So the question was, do I have any resources in terms of how to set up BPM COE if you're starting from scratch? The answer is yes. The issue with having literature about BPM COE is that first, COE in general is an idea. There's so much literature out there. It's an area that we didn't feel we had to develop too much because people know how to do that already, whether you take the vendor out and you run it. What Appian does in this case is figure out what is the organizational culture, what are the policies and procedures, what is the IT culture, and here are the basic principles. Apply those and kind of change the mindset. We figured out that most BPM COEs are an evolution once you reach the program status. If you remember the first slide that I had the basic skills, project level skills, program level skills. At the program levels where most customers are comfortable, it's when they start really wanting to get a lot more agility and speed and efficiency that they start going to that level. And that is usually the evolutionary step that you want to do in place. You kind of don't want to install it from the top. We found out that you end up having a lot of theories about how to run a BPM COE without seeing all the practice at the bottom, and ends up being kind of a policy run. Hopefully that answers your question. But we do have resources. I have slides. Send me an email. I can send you the stuff that you want. Yes? Absolutely. Starting next week, we're training on 7.9 right away. So I have a 0-day readiness policy. The question was, do I keep up our training material with the product releases? And the answer is absolutely. How often do I recommend designers take existing courses, like the same course set? I would say at least every major release, as in probably, let me rephrase that. I would say once a year, they probably should walk through that again. But that also assumes that A, they get a tremendous amount of practice. We get a lot of people that get trained and don't apply it right away. So you want to make sure that you're applying that knowledge quickly. That's one way to learn. And then you keep it up with the uptraining that we're going to be releasing pretty soon. But once a year is about right. Certification is usually the key mark to tell you that. Usually when we want people to be retrained, we'll give you a time range, tell you this is your certification is about to expire. We issue our certifications against a particular version of the product. So both partners and customers and our own people would know exactly what version you've been certified on. And usually at some point we'll say, like, this is what you learned and what you certified on is only valid up to this period of time. you need to get refreshed and recertified again. Usually recertification is fine. If you want to take courses for it or experience, that's fine too. Yes? The question was, how often do I recommend that you upgrade, given that Appian releases the product every quarter? Yeah, every quarter. I mean, look, I'll give you an honest answer. Before you guys get your hand on a release, we've already had 14 different releases internally. We treat every single line of code that gets merged into what we call the master branch, which is basically a releasable product. That big placemat that I had about shippable increment is supposed to be production-ready, production-quality work. Engineering subscribes to the same philosophy, which means every code merge, not every code deployment, every code merge that goes to master is supposed to be production-ready. Of course, the last sprint you do some hardening and some security checks on it, but the reality is we get 14 internal releases in our own internal environment that runs our business, CRM and accounting and booking and everything else in place before you even do. So that's why I recommend with confidence that every quarter you should get it, because it's not a .0 release. It's been tested, with 14 different internal releases plus the hardening sprint on top of that. So yes, every quarter is the answer. Now, there's always a question about testability, of course, but if you can't do every quarter, at least twice a year. Other questions? Interesting question. The question was, if you've just been trained on a designer and now there's a new release, do you take the new courses again? I don't have a conclusive answer yet because we're contending with two things. Either we just make the courses available to those who have ever taken training, and we're considering a subscription kind of a model going forwards. Our modules are fairly short, or we actually do the gap between a 7.8 training and a 7.9 training. Problem with that is sometimes the structure of the very presentation or what you have been taught needs to also be kind of unlearned as well. So I want to do something in Q2 that addresses that problem. But great question, yes. Yes, the question was, do we have a service offering that allows customers and partners to maybe set up their own center of excellence? Is that correct? The original slide that I had that had training, acceleration, and enablement, the enablement team is designed specifically to address these, whether they're making people better at the technical skills or they want to help organize a BPM COE. It's the enablement service line, the coaching service line that we have that's supposed to do this. Acceleration builds applications, and they go as fast as they can. Enablement is to answer all the other questions. Good question. Yes. The question was, you didn't see courses for quality assurance and whether we have courses for those or they're recommended courses to take. The answer today is they take the designer courses because they need to understand how to build these certain test cases against the product. In the future, which is the coming soon part, we'll actually build even entire learning tracks about how to do performance testing and quality assurance across the board. Product is also evolving in that area, and we need to offer courses in that area as well. Great question. And probably take the last question. I think we're almost out of time, if not out of time. The question was if there are any courses available to just the end users, those who will use the Appian product. The answer is yes. The Business Essentials, which is now the platform overview, is the one that kind of introduces you as an end user to the tool, how to collaborate on newsfeed, what tasks, reports, and records are meant to be in the first place. Because without that introduction to terminology, what's a record? The people are used to siloed applications. You go to HR app, you go to the finance app. We're kind of blending all of that to make it all in one place. And we want to embellish on that common shared understanding. So the basic course is introducing the product and a different feature set at that level is highly desired. Some of our customers that have really complex apps sometimes will develop their own internal training on top of that just to introduce both the product terminology as well as the applications been built on it. We have a couple of customers that do that. I think we are out of time at this point. Actually, we're over time. Thank you very much for being here, and we'll see you in later sessions. Thanks.